Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Emily Hiles, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Captain Simon Sykes. This evening, we're honoured to welcome the members of the 45th Infantry Battalion Association who are attending. The story of Lance Corporal Hugh McCusker, who served in the 45th Battalion during the First World War, will be told shortly. We also warmly welcome Mr. John King, President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, ACT branch. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where family and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved. And here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lance Corporal Hugh McCusker. Hugh McCusker was born on the 3rd of April 1886 in Ballinahy, Ireland, one of 7 children born to farmer Patrick McCusker and his wife Anne. Hugh lived in Ireland until he was of working age, at which point he moved to England to live with his brother in the town of Consett. There he gained employment as a blast furnace man in the local ironworks. When Hugh was 27 years old, he immigrated to Australia, arriving in Sydney in 1913. He settled in Smithtown on the Macleay River in New South Wales and was working as a labourer when the First World War broke out in 1914. Hugh McCusker enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 4th of January 1916. He was assigned to reinforcements of the 13th Battalion and began a short period of training in Australia. He embarked for active service 4 months later, sailing from Sydney aboard the troop ship Nestor. After several weeks at sea, Private McCusker arrived in Egypt, where he joined other new recruits as well as veterans of the recently abandoned Gallipoli campaign. He trained for several weeks before embarking for the Western Front in early June. He arrived in the French city of Marseille after a 6-day voyage and was immediately sent north towards the Franco-Belgian border. There, he and his comrades took up positions around the township of Erkingham and began their introduction to the Western Front. After a few weeks in France, McCusker was transferred to the 45th Battalion. He joined his new unit near the city of Etaples on the 19th of July and spent the following weeks engaged in training and route marching exercises. In August 1916, McCusker's unit was moved to the trenches around Ponthieu, where it was soon drawn into bitter fighting. Private Hubert Harris, who was also caught in the fighting, describes the conditions. Imagine men dug in a few feet into the ground and shells falling just like rain. Trenches blown up and men digging in for dear life to rebuild them, or rescuing their comrades who were buried, and in most cases the rescuers were also buried by shells. When entering trenches, we were bombarded with tear and gas shells, which made us wear our gas helmets. It is almost impossible to see and hard to breathe. I've heard officers and men say that at the landing and the Lone Pine battle at Gallipoli were a picnic compared to this last fight. McCusker and his comrades spent the following weeks rotating in and out of the front lines. They then moved to Belgium, where they were engaged in training and routine duty in the trenches. On the 15th of October, McCusker's battalion carried out a raid on enemy lines, which was largely successful, although 5 men were wounded as they withdrew. McCusker was engaged as a stretcher bearer, going into no man's land to return those who had been left behind. He carried 1 wounded man on his back and returned him to Allied lines before returning then with a stretcher to rescue a second casualty. Later that month, the 45th Battalion returned to France, where McCusker was awarded the Military Medal for his role in rescuing his wounded comrades during the fighting in Belgium. His unit saw out the rest of the year rotating in and out of the front lines as a bitterly cold winter began to set in. In February 1917, McCusker was promoted to Lance Corporal. Soon after, German forces began a strategic withdrawal to the fortified Hindenburg Line. Their retreat was eagerly followed by Allied units, seizing the opportunity to push the enemy back. In advancing on the Germans, they were confronted by well-prepared rearguard defences and booby-trapped towns, which resulted in a series of bloody clashes. This withdrawal eventually halted around the village of Bullecourt, where heavy fighting ensued. The 45th Battalion was held in reserve at Bullecourt, but was not committed to the battle. Shortly after, however, they returned to the Belgian sector to take part in a major attack on the Messines Ridge. The battle commenced in the early hours of the morning of the 7th of June 1917, when 19 mines laid beneath the German lines were detonated. The explosion destroyed the enemy's front line, creating massive craters and allowing the Allies to advance on their objectives almost unopposed. Private White, who fought at Messines, described the attack. At 10 minutes to 3, we heard, felt, and saw one of the largest explosions the world had ever seen. The earth simply rocked like a boat at sea when Messines Hill went up in earth, smoke, and flames. Another minute, and we were over the top. The heat was terrific, and we were following from within 50 yards of our barrage, and the heat from the bursting shells was like a furnace. We worked all day strengthening our position, shells screaming, bursting and tearing the earth all around us. Over the next 7 days, the gains made around Messines were consolidated, resulting in the success of the operation. Despite this, Allied units suffered nearly 25,000 casualties. Of these, nearly 7,000 were Australian. Among the dead was Lance Corporal Hugh McCusker, who was killed in action on the 7th of June 1917. His final resting place was never located. Today, he is commemorated among the missing at the Messines Gate in Ypres, Belgium. Hugh McCusker was 31 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour to my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lance Corporal Hugh McCusker, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them. lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of our director, staff and volunteers, we thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the memorial's redevelopment. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.